All right, guys, we're recording. All right, so I figured I'd start with the essays first. So, you have the choice of one big essay in which you're going to basically span imperialism, the world wars, and a little bit of the Cold War that we talked about by taking a look at two of the following regions. So, for instance, you could pick, say, North America and the Middle East as your two regions. And so you're taking a look at the impact of Europe on these regions. So if you were to take North America and the Middle East, with imperialism, you could either talk about the fact that Canada, when we get up to 1750, is still technically a colony of Britain. You could also talk about the fact that America colonized its own countries, because remember, it colonized the Philippines and it colonized Hawaii, and actually made Hawaii the 50th state. You could talk about that in the fact that the United States was trying to compete with Europe. In terms of the world wars, it's not so much how Europe impacted the United States, but how the United States got dragged into both of those wars due to its alliances with Britain, due to its ties with Europe. And then Cold War, obviously, the United States is one of the two superpowers. So how is the United States' interaction with the rest of Europe, like the formation of NATO, because we talked about NATO. You could take a look at even the fall of the Cold War. There are lots of things you could do there. And then with the Middle East or North Africa, I'd probably focus in on Egypt. Egypt is in both of those regions. And so you could talk about the effect of Europe on Egypt during imperialism, because remember, the British came in and had that spheres of influence over Egypt, helped it get out of the Ottoman Empire. Egypt was within the realm of fighting during both World War I and World War II. Egypt also was one of the third world nations during the Cold War. So there's a lot of things you could talk about with those regions.
With North America, would you expect us to talk about the U.S. and Canada
during
the World War?
You only have to pick one country in each paragraph, and you don't necessarily have to use the same country. So like you could use Canada and the imperialism one if you wanted to, and then you could talk about the U.S. and the other two.
Okay.
So as long as the country is part of the region, you could use whatever country you want to in each of the paragraphs. You don't have to talk about the exact same country all the way through. You just have to make sure you talk about a country from that region all the way through. Do we understand the difference between that? Mm-hmm. So your paragraphs would be imperialism for the first paragraph, the world wars for second, and Cold War for the third. And to kind of help you think about it, you can think of it in terms of Persia GT. Maybe pick one or two letters that you think impacted throughout that time. So you can narrow your focus. Because if you just talked about the impact of Europe completely, you'd write way more than what you need to on a final. The other thing I want to point out is the compare contrast. So that means you need to show similarities in how they treated the two regions, and again, what are some of the differences between the two regions. So that's why it's a paragraph on imperialism, a paragraph on the world wars, a paragraph on the Cold War, and you talk about both regions in each paragraph. Because if you do a separate paragraph for each region, you're going to miss that contrast. So it's important that your paragraphs be on the time period, and that you mention both regions in each paragraph.
Does each paragraph have to have a country from each region, or is it just each region?
You need to use a country as an example,
Okay.
but you don't have to use the same country in every single paragraph. Okay? Any other questions about the big essay? All right, then you have the choice to write 2 shorter essays, and you've got 4 to pick from, and you just need 2. So, first short essay, choosing one of the areas listed below, analyze how the region's relationship to global trade patterns changed from 1950 to the present. Be sure to describe the region's involvement in global trade prior to the beginning of imperialism. So this is really an imperialism essay in terms of global trade. You can bring in a little bit of World War I and World War II. You could bring in a little bit of the Cold War, but at its heart, it's an imperialism essay. So, taking a look at the options, East Asia, so that you'd be talking about China, Japan, Korea. South and Southeast Asia, India, Indochina. Make sure that the country you pick is really in the region you're selecting. Because if you say that Vietnam is in East Asia, you would be wrong. Vietnam is in Southeast Asia. So just make sure you're labeling it correctly. I don't care which one you talk about, and the fact that you only have to use one is fine, but don't say that it's in a different region. So just double check. Anyway, when I'm looking there, patterns change from 1750 to present, and I specifically say what was trade like prior to the beginning of imperialism. This is like your imperialism project. I want you, before European contact, what was trade like? During European trade contact. And then afterwards. So for China, you can talk about the before, they were actually in seclusion, and so they were mainly trading amongst themselves, and they were trading with Japan. They really weren't trading with Europe. Then the Europeans come in, they allow a couple cities in the beginning to act as ports for Europeans to come in, but the Chinese really still had all of the cards. How did it change? Opium War. The British get access to more cities as a result of the Opium War. And so that's how you would show the change. So you're looking at kind of a change over time here.
How long should these shorter ones be?
All right, you are going to be getting, just like the midterms, 2 sheets of paper you can write front and back. So the long one, I'm expecting you front and back of one and at least the front of another. If you do the 2 short essays, front and back of 1 sheet of paper.
For combined, both of them?
No, you get 2 sheets of paper, 1 essay, front and back, second essay, front and back.
Okay.
Yeah, you actually have a paper limit here. You cannot go beyond it. So this is why it's very important to do your outline. If you do your outline, you'll be fine. All right. Any more questions on the first one?
What can the outline be on? Like index card?
3x5 index card, and you can write on both sides. So if you want to take 2 and paste them together so you can write on the lines, you're more than welcome to.
And the outline's only for essay questions.
Outline is only for essay questions. So when you come in, if you're going to do the multiple choice first, you're going to hand me your index card, then you'll give me the multiple choice. I'll give it back. You can write the essay. If you want to write the essay first, you're more than welcome to. So you'd sit down and you do that. Once you turn it into me, you'd get your multiple choice.
Can we type the index card and paste it on the front? Make it like...
No. Must be handwritten. If you don't like your handwriting, get someone in your family or a friend who has neater handwriting to write it out for you. So I will tell you, it does not need to be in your particular handwriting. Just in case you're worried about your handwriting, it can be someone who has neater handwriting who has written it out for you. All right. The second essay that you have as an option. Compare and contrast how the First World War and its outcomes affected 2 of the following regions in the period of the war through the 1930s. And here you've got the Middle East, South Asia, and East Asia. So taking a look at World War I. let's say I picked South Asia and the Middle East. Well, we had fighting in the Middle East during World War I. We did not actually have fighting within South Asia, where India is. However, India sent soldiers to come and fight in the Middle East and in Europe. You can talk about the fact that in the 1930s, that's when India is starting to try and get its independence movement going. So you can talk about a lot of the different things. Gentlemen, if you're not going to be paying attention, you need to leave.
Sorry.
If I have to stop one more time, I'm kicking you out. So the big thing in terms of the comparing and contrasting, again, you need to talk about both of the regions in the same paragraph. This one, I would suggest 2 body paragraphs, one on the actual effect of World War I, and then the second one, the after effects of World War I. So anything that comes out of the Versailles Treaty, acts towards independence movements based on Woodrow Wilson's self-determination points of light. So you would really only need to have 2 body paragraphs for this one. Number 3, explain how economic and political instability led to the rise of authoritarian governments in Europe during those interwar years. You should reference 2 of the following countries in your answer: Germany, Italy, Spain, Soviet Union. So basically, rise of Nazism, rise of fascism, rise of communism. You're talking about 2 of them. So you can either talk about all fascism, in which case you'd be looking at Germany, Italy, or Spain. You can throw in communism if you want to, with the Soviet Union. But you also have the option of an entire essay option on communism. So basically you're really looking at economics, political instability. So again, you're looking at 2 body paragraphs. One on what's going on economically in the countries that led to the rise of these governments, and the other paragraph is on the political instability.
So what was something economically that went on in the Soviet Union that led to? Because I know.
Well, really that's the stuff that's coming out of World War I.
Right.
We had the food shortages. We had other sorts of resource shortages. Remember, we couldn't supply the troops with everything they needed. And so with the food shortages, people were ripe for rebellion. If they are hungry, they will rebel. Germany, the reparations they had to pay,
Right.
tank, and they had that hyperinflation.
Inflation.
Yeah, I mean, so, and the other thing is, when you're taking a look, once you get to about 1929, Great Depression was not only in the United States, it was worldwide.
Yeah, it led there.
Yeah, so everyone went through the Great Depression. So you can talk about the Great Depression with any of these countries as well.
So if you.
But also, in terms of political, Soviet Union, you've got the Civil War from 1917 to 1922. Germany, you have the Weimar Republic. Any other questions on number 3?
If you do Soviet Union for 3 and that talks about a lot about communism, could you still do 4?
Yes.
And then talk about communism?
Yes. If you choose 3 and choose the Soviet Union, you are not precluded from choosing essay 4. Because essay 4 is actually talking about what's the appeal of communism.
Right, okay. What?
The 3 is why was the economic and political situation ripe for some sort of rebellion. 4 is talking about why would people actually choose communism in terms of its promises, in terms of what it actually achieved for the short time it was in place within the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc. What is it about communism that people actually like about it? Why is it that in Greece we actually have a communist party leader in the running for We're recording. So why is it that Greece today actually has a communist leader who's in the running for leading their government? There's something appealing about communism. So number 4, that's what you would be talking about. So you could break up the paragraphs. I say in terms of both its promise and its achievements, you could use those as your paragraphs. Again, 2-body paragraph essay, one on what does communism promise? If you went to the ideal communism under Karl Marx, why is it that people would like that? And then in reality, what were some of the good things? Because they weren't all bad. There were some good things that happened. Some of the good things would be the rise of social equality, the fact that everyone was provided an education, you know, having a capitalist society isn't always the best thing. We have an increasing gap between the haves and the have-nots, and that didn't really exist under communism. Now granted, everyone in communism was more of a have-not than a have, but you didn't really have those tensions going on.
So in paragraph 1, you would talk about the promises of communism.
So you'd be really looking at Karl Marx. What is the theory of communism? What does communism promise it'll accomplish? And then in the achievements, you would take a look at Lenin, Stalin, and you could go even further up into Brezhnev if you wanted to, Khrushchev. What were some of the good things that came out of it? I mean, the Soviets did beat us to space, so there are some good things about having the government kind of direct. It just doesn't always work for everyone. Yes?
Were communes efficient? They kind of tanked, but were they efficient when they existed? Because that could be another pro that came out of communism.
Communes work if the people who are living in the commune actually know how to do the job they're assigned to. That's the key. A lot of the Chinese who are assigned to communes went there not knowing how to farm, not knowing how to make iron. And so as a result, they were put into positions where they had to kind of learn on the job. And you're going to fail for the first few years. And if that's what everyone is depending upon, you're going to have famine and problems. But the commune itself, the idea of it is a good idea. The execution of it within China wasn't great. I mean, that's the big argument with communism, is the idea of communism actually sounds really good. Who wouldn't want to live in a utopia where we don't have to have a police force, we don't have to have a government, that we are all living and working together in harmony for the betterment of human society? However, getting there, we're not ready for it yet. Okay, so those are your essay options. So again, you either choose the one big essay, or you choose the 2 shorter essays, and you can choose any 2 out of the 4. I don't care what combination you pick.
Wait, I have one last quick question.
Mm-hmm.
For question or number 3, and like the political change with Germany, what would that be? I know for Russia it's like the Civil War and stuff.
The political instability in Germany,
Yeah.
Weimar Republic, and all the corruption. So I would take a look at the rise of Hitler PowerPoint, and that would give you pretty much everything you need to know for Germany.
Is that on Google?
Yes, it is. All right, let's switch over, take a look at the study topics for the multiple choice. The final is not cumulative. You may see some references to the Industrial Revolution simply because the Industrial Revolution was so intertwined with imperialism, but I'm not asking any specific outright Industrial Revolution questions. So we start with nationalism, imperialism, then we have the world wars, Cold War is going to be very, very, very basic.
What's the structure of the multiple choice?
Just like the midterm, there will be matching, there will be regular multiple choice. No true false, no fill in the blank.
How many?
Yeah. No, not 100. I believe it's either 50 or 75. I have to go back and look. I wouldn't give you more than 75 because of the essays, to make sure that you finish in time.
50 is a good number.
There's something like a Dreyfus affair.
The Dreyfus affair, that was when Alfred Dreyfus, who was a soldier in France, he was the one who was accused of aiding Germany and was imprisoned for over 20 years. And the main reason why he was the one who was chosen to be the scapegoat is because he was Jewish. So it was an example of anti-Semitism. And after the Dreyfus affair, this is where you start to see the rise of Zionism, which is the belief that the Jews should go home to Israel and they should have their own national homeland. Can you please stop touching people? So the Dreyfus affair would show up in the nationalism PowerPoint, in the Zionism section of it. What other questions do you have about multiple choice?
How many? Wait, you said 75, right?
I say between 50 and 75. I kind of think it's 50, but it might be 75.
50 is an even number.
Yeah.
Is it gonna be on more like general things, or are we gonna be very specific? Because I know the topics you're saying, like who colonized. Are you gonna ask us more about the colonization, or like will we get into detail about?
I could ask you anything. I mean, when taking a look at this, and I talk about like the colonization, like who colonized who, I could ask, which out of the following countries did Britain colonize, and
Or
I
would
could
it be
give you a
like-
list.
Would it be like how did Britain colonize?
No, that doesn't make a very good multiple choice question. It would literally be, here are like 4 countries, which of these 4 countries did Britain colonize?
Okay.
So you would need to know the map.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not actually going to put the map
Oh, okay.
on, so you're not going to have to like look at a map and then identify what countries they are, but you do need to know which European country colonized which African and Asian country. So you need to know that.
Yeah, I actually had a question on the colonization. Like, where do you find that? Because I was looking at the books and stuff. And
What, in terms of who colonized who?
yeah, and like what happened.
That would be the map in the book that we then put on your map that should be in your notebook.
What does PES stand for?
Yeah.
Politics, economics, society, and technology.
Oh,
That's what we use in the Imperialism Project.
okay, you're right.
That's okay, it's the end of the year. Yeah.
No.
Is that just with colonized countries, or is that?
Yeah, no, it's the colonized countries, not the European ones.
Okay.
Are we gonna? Is there gonna be a lot on the Cold War? 'Cause I
No.
feel like
The main parts about the Cold War is who was on each side, the fact that you had US versus communists, and then you had that third world where you had countries that hadn't made a choice. We haven't talked too terribly much about capitalism versus command economy. We have talked about democracy versus communism. So the democracy versus communism would be what I would ask the question on. We have gone over the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, the Brezhnev Doctrine. I know I've hit in at least one class, maybe 2. But the Brezhnev Doctrine is basically the reverse of the Truman. Truman is all about protecting people from communist takeover. Brezhnev Doctrine is protecting communists from democratic takeover. So it's just communist version of the Truman Doctrine.
seem to do that a lot. The whole we make one and we'll make one.
Yep. That was a big hallmark of the Cold War, was the back and forth, almost like a ping pong match. You had the ping pong match going on between the arms and space race, where we would make an advance, then they would match it, then they'd go ahead of us, then we would match it, and then we would go. And so you had a lot of back and forth going on. McCarthy and the Red Scare, forget about the music, because we didn't get to it. Well, when I talked to him later, Billy Joel, We Didn't Start the Fire, is all the decades between end of World War II and the fall of Berlin Wall. As soon as I said it to him, that it was, guys, can I remind you that you're being recorded right now?
Just keep talking.
So when I reminded him for Billy Joel, it's We Didn't Start the Fire, and for John Denver, he recorded a duet with a Russian singer advocating I want to say it was called like Stop the War. I have it in my U drive somewhere. If we have time tomorrow as we're studying and going over your old quizzes and tasks, I'll pop it on just so you can hear it. But I won't ask any questions. End of communism, basically it's the collapse. We outspend the Soviets, we collapse their economy, they can't continue. The most visible sign of the end of communism is the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is the extra credit question on your final. What event occurred on my 13th birthday?
13th birthday,
Oh, I
1989.
remember Berlin Wall, right?
Yep, fall of the Berlin Wall.
Everyone knows this is on there.
So it's November 9th, 1989.
Yeah, I actually give you the date. You just have to tell me what is the event. Fall of the Berlin Wall.
How is anyone gonna get this wrong?
Yeah.
No, it's not a lot because
That's the point.
it's a brick.
Yes.
No. Don't even give them like a date. Just give them what happened on my birthday.
What happened
Yeah.
on my birthday?
So, well, that's actually how I put it on there, is what happened on my 13th birthday, and in parentheses, I remind people of the date. But anyway, in terms of the maps, I decided not to put the African and Asian colonies on maps. However, I reserve the right to have the Allies and Central Powers and Allies and Axis Powers and NATO and Warsaw on maps, where you have to identify either like which country is part of which group, or I might put in a wrong country and you have to identify what's the wrong country.
NATO had a lot.
That's not cool.
Yes.
They're a lot.
So chances are I'm probably not going to choose NATO for like what's the wrong country.
Warsaw was all of like Russia, like the
Except for that one country that is communist but did not join.
Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Will the ones you give us be like pretty basic, or will they be like kind of in the middle and it like could go either way? Will you give
Either
us-
or. The more likely ones are the World War I and World War II ones, because NATO is just so big.
Will all of like World War One, like everything you had during World War One and World War Two, like be on there?
Yeah. In my mind, the world wars are the ones that are most recent. I'm going to put very, very few questions about Cold War on there, because we just didn't get a whole lot of time with it. So I would say it's probably going to be like 45% nationalism, imperialism, 45% World War I, World War II. It may even be like 50% World War I, World War II, and only like 5 to 10% Cold War. So really heavy on the world wars.
Sorry, so you said that the African and Asian colonies.
I'm not actually going to put on a map, but you need to know which European country colonized which countries.
Okay.
Because what I could ask in a multiple choice question is, out of these 4 countries, say Cameroon, South Africa, Madagascar, Algeria, which one of the four did Britain colonize? And the answer would be
Cameroon. Oh, no, South
Algeria.
Africa.
No,
South Africa
Wasn't South Africa colonized by the Dutch?
first, and then the British took it over and expanded it. But Cameroon is German, Algeria is French, Madagascar,
Spanish?
I want to say it was Portuguese actually. It's either Spanish or Portuguese. I'll have to go back and look. Just not British.
What chapters would we study
Guys, go
World War on?
All right. Chapters in your book. Obviously, the Cold War. That's out of that Strayer rating I gave you.
Oh, that packet?
Yeah. Gentlemen, either hush or get out. So Cold War comes out of the Strayer handout I gave you.
The big packet.
Yes. Nationalism is chapter 23. As well as there was like one section in chapter 26. It was either section 3 or 4. Imperialism is 25. The world wars, we had 27. Revolution in Russia, we actually didn't do from the book. That was also the handout that's got the Cold War stuff in it. We did the last two sections of chapter 30, and then all of 31. So those would be the chapters. And then the Strayer packet has Russian Revolution as well as the simulation packet. It is also Russian Revolution. Any other questions on the multiple choice?
When it says, know the Armenian genocide and Holocaust and the responses to them,
We didn't really talk about the Armenian genocide too much. It was a Holocaust that happened during World War I. The Turks massacred a whole bunch of Armenians because they believed the Armenians were selling secrets to the Russians. Go around that way.
Oh, sorry.
The Armenians weren't selling secrets to the Russians, but they did kill lots and lots of Armenians. And the Armenian genocide was actually the first time we actually used the term genocide. I'm not really going to ask a question about it because we didn't have time to really go over it.
okay.
What I would potentially ask a question about is the Holocaust, because we did cover
Yeah.
that.
And then when it says the responses to them, didn't other nations just kind of ignore them? Like
Well, they ignored the Armenian genocide until recently. The Holocaust, we actually did sign the Geneva Convention
but
on
not
Human
until
Rights
After the fact, though, right?
after the fact.
Yeah.
The initial response to the Holocaust was to deny that it was going on. And there was a delay in trying to help. Other questions? Go ahead.
How was the Middle East affected during World War I?
Well, we had fighting going on in the Middle East. Because in World War I, the Ottoman Empire was one of the central powers, and the Ottoman Empire extended all the way into the Middle East. And that's where you had Lawrence of Arabia trying to convince all the Arabian tribes to fight against the Ottomans.
If you're talking about World War II and you're talking about Africa, would you just say that
There was fighting in Africa as well.
what like former colonies contributed
What they call the
troops
World
to
War,
the war?
Well, they weren't former colonies yet for a lot of them. A lot of them were still colonies. But you also had fighting going on in North Africa. You had French resistance that was headquartered in Morocco.
How much going on?
So the big thing about North Africa is the fact that most people forget we actually did have fighting going on in North Africa. We actually had fighting going on during World War One through, and to a certain extent World War II through some of the colonies in Africa that you didn't really see in Asia.
Yeah, wasn't Ethiopia a center for a lot of fighting? Was it the Italians?
Well, the Italians tried to take over Ethiopia as part of their kind of expansion in that lead up to World War II. And it was certainly one of, they captured parts of northern and southern Ethiopia, but they never got the central part of it.
Where can we find the Spanish Civil War?
Spanish Civil War was in the lead up to World War II PowerPoint. The Spanish Civil War is when the Germans and the Italians helped out Franco and the fascists, and they tested out all of their kind of new weapons. And so one of the things we tested out was the incendiary bomb, and that was what was dropped over Guernica.
What bomb?
The incendiary bomb.
Is that
The Germans and the Italians helped the Spanish?
Guernica was the name of the town, and then Pablo Picasso painted the famous painting Guernica in memorial of them.
Can we go over the Crimean War?
Alright, the Crimean War is kind of in a way like the Spanish Civil War was to World War II. The Crimean War occurred before World War I. Russia was trying to get a warm water port. They saw the Crimean Peninsula, which was part of the Ottoman Empire, kind of hanging down into the Black Sea. And so Russia invaded and tried to take it over. And the British and the French came in on the side of the Ottomans to try and help keep the Russians from taking it over. It was kind of like the last gasp of pre-industrialized fighting. That's where we had the charge of the Light Brigade, where the British try to charge in and they end up losing a lot of soldiers in a very awful battle. You have your first war photographers that are embedded with the soldiers. You have your first frontline nurses, so Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole are both there. So you have kind of the beginnings of what modern warfare is going to
Bill
look like.
Tesper, if you're in the building, please come to the special ed department. Bill Tesper, please come to the special ed department.
Right. So what you have with the Crimean War is it's really the end of your kind of traditional warfare and the beginnings of your modern warfare. Because we haven't fully industrialized yet, and we haven't brought out all of our tanks and everything, but that's where we're headed. And so the Crimean War was kind of a dress rehearsal for World War I, and the Spanish Civil War was really a dress rehearsal for World War II.
So just to kind of sum things up, Crimean War was between the Russians and the Ottomans.
Yes, and the British and the French came in on the side of the Ottomans.
And what was the result?
Basically, you had a stalemate. Ottomans gained control, but there was no real winner.
Okay.
And then the fascists won in Spain. I can give you guys about another 5 minutes.
What's the Japan and Meiji restoration?
The Japanese Meiji Restoration.
Yeah.
The Meijis are the ones that decide to fully westernize Japan, and that's what sets them on the path to becoming best buds with Germany, and will eventually have them wind up becoming allies with Germany in World War II. The big thing about the Meiji Restoration is that the Japanese emperor on down tries to westernize everything from government to the military, education, on through. Unlike the Chinese that tried to keep it out, the Japanese completely embraced it. And this is also the start of Japan's era of imperialism. Because if they're going to be like the Western nations, they should take over land like the Western nations do. So that's when they started taking over Manchuria, Korea, and other territories.
Who or what are Glasnost
Glasnost and Perestroika?
Glasnost and Perestroika is the two-pronged plan by Gorbachev to slowly end communism and bring about a democratic revival. Glasnost is openness. In your class, we're getting to it tomorrow.
Is that gonna be on the final?
Yes,
Oh.
you'll get to it tomorrow.
Yeah, we drop.
You dropped today. And the other class, we had a sub while I was at the dentist. Period 6 got it today. Anyway, Glasnost is openness. The civil rights and civil liberties that we normally think of, like Amendment 1, that is Glasnost, is they start to bring some of those freedoms to the Russians. Perestroika is the restructuring of the society, lessening government control, allowing for private ownership. You're starting to see a movement towards a market economy. And so when Gorbachev announces that that's his plan for trying to fix what's going wrong in the Soviet Union, that pretty much opens the door to the end of communism. Okay, last question. Anyone? Yes?
The collapse of the USSR, that was just basically when communism ended,
Yes.
right?
Because we outspent them
Okay.
and we crashed their economy. Yay, Reaganomics.
What was each side believe in? Like, compare like capitalism versus command economy. Like, what is
I said the capitalism versus command economy. I wasn't going to ask you a question on.
Okay.
The democracy versus communism, fair game, because we've talked about that multiple times.
Okay.
Sorry, one quick thing.
Yep.
So when it says like the arms and space race, how does this lead to the end of the Cold War?
It's the
Same
spending.
thing, we have spending.
Yep.
Okay.